Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in and listening to my thoughts about Module 2 readings this week, specifically about the theories in regards to learning and development. A lot of really great readings this week, particularly because of the variety of different theories that are out there and how a lot of them are intertwined with each other and build off of each other and go from there. So definitely had some great appreciation for some of the different perspectives that the readings provided this week. As well as commenting on the variety of different ones, I also found it really difficult to narrow down and pick which ones that I wanted to talk about in my readings this week. So I made the challenging decision to narrow down to 5 that I want to try to fit in here today, just to talk about some of the stuff in those theories. So to start us off with Erickson, I felt it was pretty relevant to start off with Erickson because he kind of is the first one to start us off. Was about Erickson's identity development. And Erickson kind of set it up, this identity development in these different stages, and you go from stage 1, 2, 3, etc., and so on. But I really like the way that Erickson talked about the transition between the stages. Erickson called this transition this crisis that one faces in developing that identity and taking it a little bit further beyond. And looking at that crisis is really trying to find this balance between these internal and external forces to figure out who you are as a person. Which ties in closely to Marcia's ego identity statuses theory. And particularly, Marcia focuses on Erickson's stage 6, which stage 6 in Erickson's theory is the first stage in adulthood. So really relevant for students at a college campus because of trying to figure out these relationships and identities and who they are and this individuality there. And Marcia sets the stage for looking at it with these two different variables, this exploration and this commitment variable. And using those both to explain how these experiences are able to resolve these crises, as mentioned with Erickson, and really to get that individual to feel comfortable and own who they are as a person. So the exploration, exploring, learning, taking from those other people and other things they read and do to figure out who their identity is, and then the commitment, owning and recognizing that this is who I am because I have this information and these experiences or this knowledge about it. So I thought those were really cool how they intertwined with each other. So moving along to the third one that I wanted to talk about today was about Chickering, and particularly about Chickering's theory of identity development. And I found it really interesting how Chickering continues to build off of, like many others, build off of Erickson's ideas in regards to that identity development. And Chickering kind of differentiates on the view of these stages and kind of how to process. In particular, Chickering views that this identity development process is not a linear process. There's all these different changing factors and things in there. And particularly, Chickering uses the term vectors to describe these different stages as was used before, but he's using these vectors, these different areas, which kind of helps to better identify that it's not this linear path. It could be kind of the circular, they weave in and out. And that by using this theory, we do have this ability to deal with all these different issues, one particular issue in these multiple vectors. And found it kind of interesting, and especially liked the way how he described the vectors as these major highways for journeying toward individualization. So kind of taking the moment to recognize that those highways at some point in time, they all can kind of intersect at some point, but they also still can separate and kind of be independent. But ultimately, we're all trying to use this highway to get to this one goal, particularly as he mentions towards this individualization of this identity development. So I thought that was kind of interesting there, as well as I did find it interesting towards the end of that chapter. There was a little bit of a conversation about some research that's been done on some of the specific student populations. And particularly saw it was really interesting, and this is on page 76, talking about how, generally speaking, involvement on a college campus is positively related to development, to finding these things as a person. However, there has been some research shown that students who are participating in intercollegiate athletes, saying that they scored lower than non-athletes in regards to educational plans, career plans, and mature relationships. And found that to be kind of interesting to say, this is a great opportunity that I have to combat that. Some of the research has been shown that those individuals, those student athletes, are not as well developed in their identity. And who they are. So, giving me that opportunity as a mentor to focus on that, provide some extra help and assistance to my students to go from there. And then the last two, just to kind of quick kind of hover over, and I think they blend really well together, would be specifically about talking about Perry and really how Perry is really working to find some meaning in these in kind of this intellectual development. And really how Perry views it as this continuum of learning, and that all these different ways from looking at it from black and white to taking into these different contexts of what's going on and realizing that some opinions are not as important. Thought it was really interesting, and one of the things it kind of talked about too in the going back in the Evans text was about how students don't learn any different from a classroom setting to in a student organization. And how we as advisors need to be able to meet them that way, to find those different ways to get that feedback, developing and designing programming that's going to help fit their individual needs. Which lastly kind of ties into Kolb, talking a little bit about these different learning styles. And I think this has been the most relevant part to looking at the students that I'm working with and seeing how they all have this different learning style. And how we all are able to take in the same processes, but really appreciate kind of how the view is about catering to these different learning styles, and especially too tying in some additional reading from one of the texts, Kolb taking his theories a little bit further, and seeing how the impact of culture makes a change on our learning style and how we really learn and how we have some impacts there. So I find that really interesting that the culture piece has some cool connections in determining how we are, in which way and which methods we do learn best. So definitely have had a chance to apply some different styles to my students based on how they're reacting, how they go, and even trying some different things to say, hey, you've done really well in this, let's keep doing it this way. That didn't work so well, let's try it a different way there. So found it really interesting there. So a lot of great theories this week. Really hard to kind of keep it short and simple, but a lot of really great ones that were really cool. Nothing really much that I felt was a failure. A lot of them just kept finding these connections on how they were relating, so I really appreciated that. That's all I got for now. Thanks for listening.